All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are Locked On Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman. And today we're talking about some free agent additions that the Falcons made and whether Auden Tate is a sign that Terry Fontenot's now doing a good job. We got some reports about Matt Ryan's trade value that leads to some skepticism from me. And then later on, we'll be joined by Locked On Giants host Patricia Traina to get her insights into newest Falcons outside linebacker Lorenzo Carter.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter, at FalcFans, and, of course, the host of this preeminent Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and, of course, on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. Give us a like when you do, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio version drops. So that's your primary reason, besides seeing this pretty face each and every day on your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, to subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. So Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated wrote a column on his Monday morning quarterback column and talked about sort of the path that led to the Falcons trading Matt Ryan. We'll revisit that and sort of dive deeper into the notion that Matt Ryan was only worth a fourth round pick, even before the Falcons were seemingly backed in the corner and quote unquote forced to do right by Matt Ryan, all that various stuff. So we'll talk about that. He also mentioned how, the Falcons are potentially still working on a Grady Jarrett extension. And so initially in today's episode, I was going to talk about the potential possibility that the Falcons could trade Grady Jarrett, but we'll just sort of punt that to a later day because the Falcons made some free agent additions on Monday, adding Auden Tate, re-signing Quadree Ollison. We'll get into that. They're also visiting with another pass rusher in Kemoko Turay. So we'll talk about all that. In addition to later in the episode, we will talk with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants to talk about Lorenzo Carter. So let's jump into today's moves. And I like these moves. You've heard me for the last week be very skeptical and critical of Terry Fontenot and company and the job that they've done over the last 14 months. Later on today's episode, you'll hear me not so skeptical and questioning of the job that they have done, but more the reporting on the side of Albert Breer, but more on that later. But I think when it comes to the types of positive moves that deserve praise for Terry Fontenot and company, I think adding a player like Auden Tate makes a ton of sense. He's a big 6'5", 230-pound wide receiver, wins in contested catch situations, and really fits the description that you heard me guys talk about a couple of weeks ago when I went out through my own free agent wish list and sort of was of the mindset of sort of cutting corners at the wide receiver position and bringing a whole bunch of sort of special teams guys that could come in and compete for some opportunities. And Tate sort of checks that box. He's not necessarily a special teams guy, but was a guy that in limited opportunities in Cincinnati was productive, primarily was a backup to AJ Green for several years there, and thus did not get a lot of opportunities there. Obviously, the last couple of years, it's been T. Higgins and Jamar Chase that have sort of overshadowed him. But in that 2019 season where AJ Green was out for the season, Tate did get a lot more production that year, had 40 catches in 12 games and 10 starts, 575 yards and a touchdown, and a guy that really does win in those contested catch situations. You watch his highlight reel, you're going to see a whole bunch of fades and back shoulder balls and big hands, big wingspan, all these various things, high catch radius. And we know that with Arthur Smith and how he likes to utilize that X wide receiver based off of what we saw in year one, it's a lot of fades, it's a lot of digs. Tate can win on those fades, questions about the digs and the yards after the catch and all that sort of stuff. But this is a good move for the Falcons because it gives them a viable X wide receiver. And now the Falcons don't have to feel as compelled to reach on that position in the draft. You say in round 1 with a Drake London out of USC, and round 3 with an Alec Pierce out of Cincinnati. Tate does give them a viable option at that position and sort of fits in that with that Fabian Moreau strategy that we've talked about previous on the podcast, where you're trying to, you're bargain bin shopping. No one's going to sit here and argue that Fabian Moreau is one of the great corners in the NFL, but he gives you at least average NFL starting production for veteran minimum, and based off of what Tate has done in his lone season of extended looks, he's not going to be a top 50 wide receiver, but could he be the 67th best wide receiver in the league and get you 500, 600 yards or something like that, and 50 plus catches or something like that? Yeah, he can do that. And for potentially the veteran minimum, presuming what the Falcons signed him to in a 1-year deal, that makes total sense. As we said before, like, the Falcons can't offer you more money. They can't offer you, contention in a winning environment, but they can offer some of these young guys opportunity. Kemoko Turay fits into that same category, and he visited with the Falcons on Monday from the Indianapolis Colts, and he's dealt with some injuries there. And so if the Falcons can pick up a guy like Kemoko Turay, that's another really positive move, in my opinion, for this regime when we talk about sort of moves that are deserving of praise. Turay, again, if you can make an argument that based off of what he did in Indianapolis these last 4 years, dealt with some injuries the last couple of years that have limited his opportunities and his lack of development. But on a per snap basis, he kind of checks a lot of the same boxes that Shaq Barrett checked when he was a backup behind guys like Von Miller and Shane Ray in Denver, right? And so, again, not going to sit here and say Kemoko Turay is due to get 10 or more sacks or whatever the case may be with expanded opportunity, but these are the types of bets that you want to see this team making. Potentially another player like that in a similar mold was Jannard Avery, who visited with the team last week, did sign with the Steelers on Monday. But these are the types of moves that when we're talking about, bargain bin shopping, these swings are the things that really, in my opinion, are much more deserving of praise than, say, some of the other moves that people have been, to me, endlessly praising, Terry Fontenot and company for. So thumbs up for me on these potential signings. Let's talk about Quadree Ollison. Not a thumbs down or anything, just kind of neutral to this move, because it doesn't make a ton of sense, because Quadree Ollison was an exclusive rights free agent that the Falcons did not tender an offer, and so he became an unrestricted free agent. And now re-signing him 2 weeks later, it just doesn't make a ton of sense to me why the Falcons did it that way. Why couldn't they have done this 2 weeks ago? And even if you say, well, maybe this now means that the Falcons are going to cut Mike Davis, which, we talk about doing right by the player, that would not definitely be not doing right by the player by waiting until practically April to cut a player when the market is pretty much drying up. But if they did that, why couldn't they have done that 2 weeks ago? They could have cut Mike Davis and still re-signed Quadree Ollison then. So not a bad move by any means. You get another body in here. Certainly Quadree Ollison in limited opportunities flash some potential, but you just sort of wonder why the timeline of the Falcons delaying this move for 2 weeks to let Quadree Ollison hit the market when he didn't necessarily have to hit the market, or whatever the case may be, because it's not saving money like you did with, say, Anthony Rush, who you could have tendered at $2.4 million, but by not tendering him and letting him become an unrestricted free agent and then re-signing him to a 1-year deal, you're saving about $1.5 million against the salary cap. You're not really doing that with Quadree Ollison. So not a bad move, but you just kind of wonder, like, why did the Falcons do it this way? So that's my only question mark in terms of that regard. So we'll move on from there and get dive deeper into the conversation about whether or not the Falcons could have gotten more from Matt Ryan. Looking at Albert Breer's Monday morning column that basically, said that, the Falcons were going to struggle to find more than a 4th round pick to Matt Ryan all along. And it just simply wasn't the timing of the situation that led to the Falcons only getting a 3rd round pick. So we'll scrutinize that a little bit more as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast. But guys, before we get there, I got to plug the Locked On Hawks podcast, where my guy Brad Rowland has you covered on all the daily topics and conversations surrounding the Atlanta Hawks. Make sure you follow Locked On Hawks on your preferred podcast platform, including now on YouTube. So guys, the Final Four is finally here, and we're going to find out who the national champions are going to be within the week. So you can get in on that action before it's too late by heading over to betonline.net, the number one source for all your betting needs and info. And you can go there for podcasts. You can get the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it. BetOnline has it all. And maybe you're not necessarily big on March Madness, but BetOnline still has you covered for the NBA and NHL playoffs upcoming, UFC 273, the Masters in the month of April, as of course the 2022 NFL Draft, and the incredible props there as well as your favorite Vegas casino games. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to sign up today at betonline.net. BetOnline, where the game starts. So as we jump into this Albert Breer column, I want to say up front, I don't think Albert Breer is making this stuff up. I think he's getting, his sources from somewhere, but I think you kind of question after reading this, like, where's his source? We'll get into that maybe a little bit later. But for those of you that did not read the column or are not subscribers to Sports Illustrated, the broad strokes of what he put out there on Monday, talking about the sort of timeline of the Falcons, trading Matt Ryan and how the deal worked out, was that the Falcons were tentatively asking about Matt Ryan in his trade value during the combine. And according to Breer, that Ryan's age and contract was going to make it, quote unquote, difficult for the Falcons to get more than a 4th round pick. He says that the Falcons also seemingly had interest in Deshaun Watson a year ago when they heard through the grapevine that he was interested in playing for his hometown team. But obviously nothing could happen during 2021. That they started negotiating a trade for Matt Ryan with the Colts once they moved his option bonus back, which would have occurred on Thursday, March 17th. Then Watson chose the Browns on Friday, the 18th. Then Ryan and the Colts finally spoke for the first time on Saturday, the 19th. Then on Sunday, the Colts called the Falcons and said they couldn't give up more than a 4th due to Matt Ryan's age. And then on the 21st, on Monday, Terry Fontenot was able to sort of negotiate, on Sunday, Terry Fontenot was able to negotiate it up to a 3rd round pick. And then on Monday, the 21st, they wound up cementing the trade officially. So no disputes on that sort of timeline from Thursday to Monday that seems to be corroborated by other sources like Matt Ryan himself. The only issue I had with this article was just sort of the notion that back in the beginning of March, when the Falcons were talking to teams secretly about shopping Matt Ryan and trying to gauge his trade market, which, I don't doubt that the Falcons did. Of course, they should have done that. The idea that they were only going to get a 4th round pick for Matt Ryan, even then, to me is I'm highly dubious of that. And so, again, not to sit here and say that Albert Breer is making this up. I'd probably be a lot less skeptical if Peter King wrote this. But it just seems like when you read this article, and I'm curious for the other people that read it, did they get a similar vibe as I did? But it's one of those things where it feels like, where is this source? Like, because he's quoting like conversations that Chris Ballard and Terry Fontenot had, like quotes from the conversations they had, and you're sitting here going like, okay, did Chris Ballard tell you this, or did Terry Fontenot tell you this? And it feels like Terry Fontenot tell you this, and again, that's part of why I'm skeptical, because it feels like this is all part of the sort of spin and damage control of like, oh, like we were never going to get more than what we got, and the fact that we got a 3rd round is actually, a sign of how great and how good a job we're doing, or whatever the case may be. Because the reason why I'm skeptical is not that Matt Ryan's trade market was not nearly as robust as we initially, and myself included, sort of projected it when we talked earlier this offseason about, potentially trying to get, a 1st and a conditional 3rd for Matt Ryan in order to justify that trade. Okay, say we're not going to get a 1st round pick, but the idea that we couldn't get like a 2nd for Matt Ryan seems highly dubious to me, because when we look at the history of these quarterback trades, that when you look at the quarterbacks that have been traded by a 4th, that was basically Joe Flacco and Nick Foles in recent years. Joe Flacco in 2019 to the Broncos, where he was basically expected to be a bridge quarterback for when they eventually drafted Drew Lock. And then you have Nick Foles in 2020 when he was traded to the Bears, basically to compete for a starting job with Mitch Trubisky, not necessarily being handed a starting job. And then when you compare that to some of these other quarterback deals, we're not talking about the Matt Staffords and the Russell Wilson type of trades, or even the Deshaun Watson trade, but just like what Sam Darnold was traded for last year, what Carson Wentz has been traded for the last 2 years, hell, what Josh Rosen was traded for 3 years ago. All these guys were traded for what about, when you look at the trade value charts, amounts to at the minimum a late 2nd round pick. Wentz went for a high 2nd round pick this year. And, some of these guys, particularly a player like Wentz, had more problematic contracts than what Matt Ryan had. Like, if a team, back in early March where the Falcons are shopping Matt Ryan, like, you're looking at $16 million in terms of what you have to absorb for Matt Ryan if you were to acquire him from another team, where Carson Wentz, you're looking at $28 million, almost twice as much. And so the idea that like, oh, Carson Wentz could get a 2nd round pick because he's 8 years younger than Matt Ryan, okay, like that's an explanation, but it's hard for me to really buy that at this point in time. And given that we know that, some of these contracts are more prohibitive than Matt Ryan. I think Joe Flacco's in 2019 was more prohibitive than Matt Ryan's contract was entering this offseason, if I recall correctly. But and then you also couple that with the idea that, we know that NFL teams feel much better about Matt Ryan than they do some of these other quarterbacks. Like I'm very curious when Mike Sando of The Athletic comes out with his quarterback tiers later this summer, where Matt Ryan ranks on that tier list. But we know based off of where Matt Ryan ranked last summer, it is considerably higher than what Sam Darnold, Carson Wentz, Josh Rosen were when they got traded. You can even use Alex Smith going back to his 2 trades, not only to Kansas City back in 2013, where he went for basically a second round pick. And then you go to his 2018 trade to Washington, where he was traded for a 3rd round pick plus Kendall Fuller, which probably amounts to being basically a 2nd round pick when you add it all up together. So it's just one of those things where it's like, I have a hard time buying that Matt Ryan was never worth more than a 4th round pick. Right. That just feels like something that you would, tell Albert Breer, put this out there so that we look better than we. So that was my interpretation. I'm sure other people will sort of disagree with that point. And if you're sitting here going like, why are we still talking about this? Because like Albert Breer wrote about it, guys. That's why we're talking about it. Like, just like last week when the Falcons had a press conference about trading Matt Ryan, we continue to talk about Matt Ryan. It's like, if more information comes out about this trade, it's relevant to the Falcons. It's relevant to the conversation over whether or not the people that are running the organization are doing a good job. Like, I don't understand why people don't want to talk about it. Well, I know why people don't want to talk about it, because it will have to cause you to maybe have some question marks and have some concerns. And we're still in the honeymoon period with this regime and believing that, everything they do is great and wonderful. And again, if that's your opinion, that's fine. I see red flags that have me have some concerns. Again, not saying that they're doing a bad job. Again, getting more moves like Auden Tate and Kemoko Turay or whatever the case may be, to me are not bad moves by any means. But it's just one of those things where I do have my concerns based off of how they've handled their personnel, as well as, play calling on the football field. That to me, there are some question marks that you have to have, and they haven't necessarily won me over. Auden Tate's a step in the right direction, but it's not a huge step in the right direction. So we'll see what unpacks over the rest of the season. We'll see if we get any more details on this Matt Ryan issue. We'll see if any other reporters sort of corroborate it. Some more, let's say, independent-minded reporters may corroborate this story from Albert Breer that Matt Ryan's trade market was always depressed, and the Falcons, not only were doing right by Matt Ryan, but we're actually getting more than what his trade market seemed to indicate that they were ever going to get. But we'll just sort of have to see if there's any more information about it. If there's not, then we're not going to spend a ton of time talking about it. But certainly I think it was a relevant conversation. And of course, the other nugget in that information, as I mentioned earlier, was the idea that the Falcons are still working on a potential extension for Grady Jarrett. And later in this week, hopefully, potentially tomorrow, depending on how the schedule works out, we can talk about, whether or not trading Grady Jarrett moving forward makes a ton of sense, or the Falcons continue. Why can't I talk today? Continue to decide to punt that decision to next year. So we'll revisit that later in the week. But for the rest of today's episode, we will touch upon Lorenzo Carter's addition by being joined by Patricia Traina, the host of Locked On Giants, to get her insight into what Lorenzo Carter brought to the field for the Giants and what he could potentially be bringing to the field for the Atlanta Falcons. But before we get into all of that, guys, I do want to plug the Locked On NFL podcast that you can find on your preferred podcast platform, including on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On NFL so that you can get the insight and the scoops to all the big and small moves made around the NFL. Of course, with the league meetings going on, I'm sure those guys are going to be covering you with all the potential rule changes or non-rule changes that occur over the course of the week. So check out Locked On NFL on your preferred podcast platform. And guys, I also want to let you know that today's episode of Locked On Falcons is brought to you by Rock Auto. With ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why wait while the person behind the counter orders parts on their computer when you already have a computer with access to rockauto.com at home or in your pocket? Save time and money when using Rock Auto instead of spending up to twice as much for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years with reliably low prices for every single customer. They have everything you need from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Just go to rockauto.com, browse their easy-to-use website, and see all the parts available for your car or truck. And then when you do, write Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So, guys, you are Locked On Falcons, and today I am joined by Patricia Traina, the host of Locked On Giants, and she's here to talk with us about the newest Falcon and outside linebacker Lorenzo Carter. Patricia, welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Aaron. Great to see you as always.
Now, jumping into the Lorenzo Carter conversation, I guess I'll ask the sort of vague and general question. What type of player are the Falcons getting in Lorenzo Carter?
I'll tell you what, I like Lorenzo Carter. I was very sorry to see him leave. I was hoping the Giants would re-sign him to the one-year prove-it deal. He's a good kid. He's a hard worker. He's very mature, probably a little more mature for his age than you would think, which is a good thing, by the way. He's very focused, knows what he has to do, knows what he wants to do and how to get there. What's been setting him back has been a couple of things. Number one, in his rookie season, his coaching and the way he was deployed wasn't always a good fit for him. And, you combine that with the fact that he didn't really know how to put together a pass rush plan. Now, by his second season with the Giants, he figured out how to put together a pass rush plan. And we started to see signs of him potentially becoming what I call a Batman pass rusher, a lead pass rusher. Then the next year he got injured. He suffered, I think it was an Achilles. I want to say 4 or 5 weeks into the season. I can't remember exactly when. And then he came back last year and started off slow, but picked up. Then he had a mid-season ankle sprain, which slowed him down. Really didn't come on last year until like the last 4 games of the season. And what was interesting about last year was how he was deployed. It was a little different than what he had been deployed earlier when he had the one really good year that made you say, oh, he could potentially be a Batman pass rusher. Lorenzo Carter's about 252 pounds, and they had him lining up against offensive tackles who outweighed him by like 20, 30 pounds or more. And I'm sorry, the law of physics say you're not going to win those battles. So a lot of times Carter was stunted. So towards the end there, they kind of changed up a little bit what he was doing. And he got most of his sacks, most of his pressures in the last 4 games of the season. And that gave everybody hope that maybe he would get a one-year prove-it deal from the Giants to come back fully healthy. Now he didn't have to rehab, from his Achilles injury like he did the year before, and maybe come back and establish himself as a pass rusher. So I think the Falcons got themselves a really good and promising young player who's got a great attitude, going to fit into that locker room nicely, and hopefully does good things for you.
So you talk about that final month of the season where he had 5 sacks in the last 4 games, and it sounds like you think, did he turn a corner in his own development, or is that more a byproduct of the scheme sort of shifting and knowing how to utilize him a little bit better?
I think it was a combination of a couple things. It was a combination of them changing up how they were using him a little bit. Also, he got healthy because, again, he had the ankle injury mid-year, and you could tell that was slowing him down, particularly his get off. And once he got healthy, the confidence was always there. He always, knew how to put together a pass rush plan, ever since his second season.
Mm-hmm.
But, the physical limitations because of the injuries, I think, slowed him down. And, once he put everything together and the body cooperated, he started to show signs of being a potentially good player and a guy who could maybe, be he is an every down player, but a guy who could maybe be a solid pass rusher.
Now, I know when we did our crossover preview ahead of the Falcons-Giants matchup earlier this season, one of the things that you mentioned to me about a weakness for the Giants defense was their ability to sort of set the edge and defend the outside runs. Was that due to, maybe some questionable play by Lorenzo Carter? Maybe that was some of the other outside linebackers. I'm curious, when you talk about Carter being an every down player, how does he impact as a run defender?
He's not bad as a run defender. I think a lot of the problems the Giants had went to the other side. They started the season with O'Shane Ximenez with their as one of their outside linebackers, and that was like, an invitation to run. He was not just he couldn't anchor against a run. Carter was a little bit more stout, I think, against a run and setting that edge. But then again, the Giants had injuries. They lost Blake Martinez, who was a good stopgap against, or a good their last line of defense against the run. So that impacted things. But Carter himself, I mean, in the beginning, again, because of the injury and he was trying to come back to himself, there might have been some hesitation in his game. There might have been, like I said, not that quickness. But as he got healthier, he got better against the run, I thought.
Okay. And I know the sort of Achilles injuries, it usually takes you a full season to sort of round back into shape. And as you mentioned, sort of things kind of derailed a little bit with maybe that midseason ankle injury, but things are sort of coming on strong. So it sounds like potentially he can sort of hit the ground running here in Atlanta. Patricia, I really thank you for joining me today to talk a little bit about Lorenzo Carter. Let the Locked On Falcons listeners know sort of what sort of topics you have going on Locked On Giants. I know Falcon fans are very curious about what the Giants are going to do with those two picks ahead of them. But what are some of the other things that you're getting into on Locked On Giants?
Yeah, so I'm looking to line up some of our Locked On College hosts from all the individual schools that we cover, the divisions, and I want to get firsthand knowledge from all these people who cover all these, these young prospects, and find out the strengths, the weaknesses, and just kind of, it's always great to get insight. We read so many scouting reports and we see film and stuff like that, but our college hosts who do a great job, they are the ones who are covering these young athletes every day, and I think their information can be very valuable. So that's something that I like to do leading up to the draft. I also have Rick Ciratella is going to come on the show with me at some point this week. I've got my football guru from Giants Country, which is the site I write for. Coach Gene Clemens is going to pop on. So we are going all out on the draft over at Locked On Giants. We're going to talk about all these prospects. We'll talk about some scenarios and just keep an eye on how these trades and stuff go, especially as we go through the rest of these pro days and see who emerges, whose stock rises, and whose declines.
Absolutely. Look forward to checking it out, Patricia. And I'm hoping if things go well this month, we might be seeing Patricia a little bit later this month in the lead up to the draft here on Locked On Falcons. But again, I thank you for joining me today to talk about Lorenzo Carter, and we'll sort of see what's going on, potentially later this month here on Locked On Falcons.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.
So, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. Again, don't know quite what the plan is for tomorrow's episode, because I got a bunch of guests coming on over the next couple of days, and I don't have finalized what order of the episodes I want to come out. But I know we're going to be talking with Mark Schofield later this week about the quarterbacks. I know we're going to be talking about with Will McFadden of the Believe in Falcons podcast about the Falcons offseason and potentially more on that. We'll also be getting some insights from Tyler Rowland, the host of Locked On Titans, about Marcus Mariota and his time in Tennessee, and where and why things went wrong or where things went right, and whether or not a second chance with Arthur Smith, could lead to Mariota having greater success here in Atlanta. So those are going to be some topics that we're going to discuss as the week unfolds. Just don't quite know what the order is going to be. But if you want to provide your feedback on anything I've discussed on today's episode, anything I've discussed on previous episodes, or anything you want me to discuss on future episodes, of course, you can hit me up on Twitter at Locked On Falcons, on Facebook at Locked On Falcons. You can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And guys, in addition to this great week, a lot of great content coming for you later this month, or in the month of April, next month, when it comes to draft content. So if you're curious about some of the things, it's tease. We'll keep you in store a little bit on what some of that stuff is going to be, but a lot of draft content coming your way over the next 4 weeks as we get geared up for the draft. And speaking of getting geared up for the draft, why not check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, where Eric Crocker and Ryan Tracy are giving you the lowdown each and every day on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, free and available on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, as well as on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On NFL Draft to get all that insight and more, in addition to making Locked On Hawks, Locked On Braves, Locked On Bulldogs your second listen each and every day. Guys, that's going to do it for us here. Appreciate it. Till then.